Good evening and welcome. I'm going to introduce Dr. Robert Hedaya, who is the pioneer in functional medicine psychiatry. He's a professor at Georgetown Medical School. He is the author of many books, and I could spend the next half hour telling you about all of his achievements and contributions to the field of psychiatry and medicine in general. But that's not what you're here for. You're here to learn about social anxiety, and he's going to give you a very different perspective and some great new solutions. So enjoy, and we welcome your questions. Dr. Hedaya?
I don't know if you can hear me here. Let's see. Okay, how's that sound? Let's see, can people hear me? I guess that's a hands up. That means people can hear me?
Yeah.
Great, beautiful. Thank you for letting me know, Carissa. I appreciate that. Okay, well, so today we're going to talk about anxiety, social anxiety, and I'm going to take a little bit of a different look at it than probably what you're used to. I want to kind of give you a background here of how to think about psychiatric or neuropsychiatric disorders. How you explain them and how you describe the source of the problem depends on, in a way, on the size or what kind of lens you use. So if you use a very high-powered lens, you can see very fine detail, right? And so you could look at atoms and like carbon atoms or DNA atoms, right? So you look at genetics with the highest power microscope, so to speak, or psychiatric microscope, you look at the DNA. And then you might look at something called methylation and how the genes are expressed, right? And then if you want to look a little bit with a little bit of less of a powerful microscope, you might look at metabolic things or things like hormones. And then if you want to look at a little less powerful microscope, you kind of look maybe at organs, like how is the brain as an organ doing, right? Somewhere along there, you might look at serotonin molecules, right? And then you might want to look at how is the brain organ affected by other organs in the body. Then you might actually broaden, look at a little bigger picture now, and you might look at the relationships that a person is in, right? Their spouse or their work relationships or their friendships. What is the environment they're in? What is the culture they're in? You see, the lens determines how you describe and explain the problem. So when you talk about social anxiety, well, we can kind of explain it based on some genetics, the serotonin transporters, or we can explain it based on, say, thyroid genetics in the brain that causes the production of a certain type of thyroid hormone in the brain. We can describe it and explain it by genetics of the adrenal gland or how the adrenal glands function. We can explain it in metabolic ways, which we're going to talk about today. And we're going to also explain it in terms of networks in the brain. And but again, these are just thin slices of all the levels of any neuropsychiatric problem, right? So I want you to understand that we're kind of focusing at a certain point in this hierarchy, okay? Along the way, by the way, if anyone has questions, put them in the chat, and Dr. Morris will let me know that they're there, and I'll try to address them, okay? So that's the background. And then basically, that took me actually 4 years to figure out when I was in my training, because I go into a lecture and the explanation for depression is serotonin, or the explanation for depression is the family system, or it's the thoughts, and it was like everyone swore that their model was the model. And they couldn't all be wrong and they couldn't all be right. So it took me a long time to figure out what I just told you. It's actually pretty obvious, right? So let's talk about metabolics today. And specifically, what I want to talk about, I want to talk to you a little bit about inflammation, anxiety. Okay. So I always say that if we're not hit by a truck, what's going to kill us is inflammation. It's inflammation wherever it is. If it's in the heart, you have heart disease. In the brain, you could have dementia. If it's in other organs, you'll have other kidney problems, for example, gastrointestinal problems or cancer. These are all inflammation related disorders, right? So inflammation, of course, plays a role in psychiatric disorders. It's actually a key driver of psychiatric disorders. And if you actually look at the genetics of disorders like bipolar disorder, anxiety disorder, you'll find that the immune system, which is related to inflammation, actually plays a key role in many psychiatric disorders, and the same with anxiety, right? Now, talking about social anxiety, right? So let's say a person has inflammation. What actually happens in the brain, and how does this convert into social anxiety? So let's say you have an infection. Actually, I'm going to share my screen now, and I'm going to show you the brain of a person who actually had anxiety related to an infection. Okay. And so let me do this here. Here we go. Okay. So this is the brain of a guy who was a middle-aged guy, probably about 40. And here you see all this red area. This is the brain. Let me actually give you a little background, right? I look at these all day long, so I assume everybody knows what they're looking at. Anything that's gray is normal, first of all. Anything that red is unstable, overactive, irritable, irritated, okay? This is middle panel here on the left is looking at the brain at the head, really, from the side. And here you see the nose and the eyes here, and the ears would be around here. This is the back of the head, top of the head, front of the head. And this is looking at the person's head from the top down. So the feet are on the other side of the screen, and the hair would be coming out of your screen towards you. And that is right here. And then here is a coronal section of the brain, and the ears are right here on the right and left here. And this is kind of like slicing through right here, up and down through the head. Okay. So this is a guy who came with anxiety and a little paranoia actually, and he was not a paranoid schizophrenic or paranoid personality, but he had anxiety, and he was having real trouble functioning. And I did, based on the history and the physical, etc., we did some testing and we found out that he had a mycoplasma infection. He was having a lot of marital problems. He was actually separated. And here he is in the course, right? He is with the infection. And here he is, the same area in the brain, exact same coordinates in the brain 3 months after the infection is treated. Now, what you want to notice here is these red areas here are areas that are really inflamed and unstable. Okay. So you can see the inflammation is markedly reduced here. Look, first of all, how slow it is to go away. We treated him with azithromycin. You can see it was really reducing in size. Now, you see these wider areas here, this outline here? You see in the front here and over here. This is a particular network in the brain. It's called the salience network. The salience network tells you what's important, what should I pay attention to, what's going to give me a reward. So you can see here, his salience network here is not working very well. He can't tell what he should pay attention to. He's overwhelmed. He can't process all the stimuli that are coming in, right? Now, the other thing that you'll see here is this right side here, back here, is the parietal area. And the parietal area on the right is very involved in social situations. It's very involved in seeing the big picture. So let's say you go into a cocktail party, right? And you go in, and if you have social anxiety, you're immediately thinking about, oh my God, how am I going to cope with all these stimuli, everything that's going on? I don't know what to do. How am I going to talk? What am I going to talk about? I better get a drink, whatever it is. If this part of the brain is working well, the parietal area, you go in and you don't really go into all of that stuff. You actually are kind of looking at the big picture and all the people. You're taking the big picture and you're deciding maybe what's important here. What should I pay attention to? But you're seeing the whole picture. You're not getting pulled into the detail. right? That's the right parietal area. It sees the whole picture. Now, if you see here, he's still having some trouble, mostly in the frontal area, but still a little bit in the right parietal area. But he actually was getting a lot better. His paranoia went away. He was actually able to focus, and actually things settled down in his life a lot. Now, here, what you see in this big picture of the brain here is that these areas here, these yellow areas, are nerve tracts, specific nerve tracts that are overactive, they're unstable. And the front of his brain here, the nerve tracts between the left and right side are not really communicating well. So he still has some inflammation going on. So if anyone has questions about this, you can ask now, but I'm going to move on. And
So if he went to a party, what would happen?
well, if this guy goes to a party, he's going to be completely overwhelmed. He's going to be so overwhelmed. He's not going to really want to go to the party at all. Why isn't he going to want to go to the party? He might say, well, he feels insecure. People are going to think this of me. But really, why he's not going to the parties, his brain can't work. His brain can't keep up with the demands of socializing. You know, when you're socializing, there's a lot that goes on. You have to attend your brain unconsciously has to attend to all the things that are going on in your body and the brain. And it also has to attend to all the stimuli in the brain, in the environment. And it has to feed those back together, and it has to predict outcomes and make output. It's a lot of work, things that are going on, you know, hundreds, if not millions of processes going on that you don't even know about. What you do know is, I don't think I could cope with this. I'm gonna look weird. I'm gonna say something weird. I'm not gonna be able to talk. I'm gonna have a panic attack.
So self-attack.
You're just overwhelmed. You're just overwhelmed. So how are you gonna go? It's kind of like going into a boxing ring with your hands tied behind your back. Like, really? You're gonna do that? I mean, I think you'd have anxiety if you were gonna do that. So that's kind of what's going on. If we look at the brain of people who have social anxiety, we're going to see abnormalities in various areas. Now, what I want to focus on before, can it get better? Yes, he got better, actually. He was in treatment for 6 months. He got better. This was this QEEG here, the second QEEG here, right here. These three images here are about 3 months or so into the treatment, but he went further. But what I want to explain here, I want to drill down a little more. I'll take the question in a second. But what I want to do is I want to drill down into the metabolic nature of what happens when you have an infection or inflammation in your body. It doesn't really matter where the inflammation is coming from. It could be an infection in the brain, could be in your intestines, could be mold in your environment. It really doesn't matter. You have inflammation. When you have inflammation, here's what happens. Normally, in a healthy person, you eat protein and you take from the protein, you extract tryptophan. Probably many of you heard of tryptophan. It's an essential amino acid. It is converted from tryptophan, assuming you digest it, the protein, and you absorb it, right? It's converted into something called 5-HTP. 5-HTP is a supplement you actually buy online. 5-HTP is then converted into serotonin, right? Serotonin, you all know, you've all heard about serotonin, I'm sure. It helps modulate mood, OCD, anxiety, even panic. It's related to panic. And the serotonin is then converted into melatonin, which helps you fall asleep, helps keep you on rhythm, etc. Now, when you have inflammation, whatever its source, the tryptophan that you eat is not going to go down that pathway. It's going to go down another pathway that's actually called the kynurenine pathway. And the kynurenine pathway actually causes anxiety. And what it does is it increases glutamate. Glutamate is excitatory. We need glutamate, but in reasonable amounts. And when you have too much glutamate, it causes anxiety. It's actually even damaging to the neurons. The GABA, which is like your Valium-like chemical in the brain, the calming chemical, is actually goes down, and your ability to make the GABA goes down. And also, you tend to use a lot of zinc when you have inflammation, so you have less function of the serotonin receptors. But the main point here is that your tryptophan from your diet gets rerouted into an anxiety-producing chemical, right? Then you have more anxiety-producing chemical, less serotonin, you have less zinc, which means your serotonin signaling is worse, and also you have changes in genetic expression. So there's a real clear, we know about this, very clear metabolic pathway. So what do we want to do? We want to reduce the inflammation. We want to find the source of the inflammation, and we want to treat it. And that gets to a root cause. So let's see what's the question here.
The neural pathways emerge as soon as a person is self-aware of their anxiety.
The question is, do neural pathways, let me see. I don't really, let me open the chat here and see. Let me see. Do neural pathways emerge instantly as soon as the person is self-aware of their anxiety? Well, that's a good question. So I would say for sure when you have anxiety, you know that the neural pathways were probably emergent before you were aware. They would tend to come first. So something would come from into your awareness, either from the pathways or from the environment. So for example, let's say you had trauma when you were a young kid, and it always happened in a yellow room with balloons on in the room. I'm just making something up. Now you're 30 years later, and you walk into a room that's yellow and there are balloons in the room, and you're feeling anxious suddenly, and you don't know why. Well, your brain has already recognized and made the link between your past history of trauma in that environment, and it already did that before you even felt your anxiety. And then it activated the pathways, and there are multiple pathways involved with the anxiety. And so that's already happened. As soon as your unconscious brain saw the trigger, it activated the pathways. If that answer, I think that answers your question. I hope it answers your question. Okay. All right. So now what I would like to do, I'm going to actually close this down unless somebody, I'll leave it open here, but I'm going to show you now a little bit more. This is going to be fascinating, I believe. This here is a quantitative EEG. Here. So let me tell you again where we are here. Again, this is the brain. Gray is normal. Yellow is overactive and unstable. And where you see blue, for example, here is very slow. And here you see the pathways here that are actually too fast and unstable. And we can actually identify each of these pathways. So for example, here you see all this yellow go away. A lot of the yellow went away there. Right? That's the corpus callosum, and that connects to the right and left parts of the brain. Now, this person here, you can see this red stuff here, all that red area, that's the surface of the brain, and that's unstable. And this is a particular network. This white areas that are outlined, there's a particular network. This is the salience network, similar to the network that I was telling you about before. And what we see here, this is the posterior cingulate gyrus. This is very, the cingulate gyrus is like this. It goes around, it's almost like a C, like the cingulate here. And it's very much involved in anxiety. And you can see here that the posterior and a little bit of the anterior, the front part of the cingulate gyrus is red. That means it's very unstable. And this guy had a lot of anxiety. And now there are processes, they don't just say, oh, let me affect the anxiety network, right? They affect multiple networks, and they don't restrict themselves. So you see part of his anxiety network here, right? Now we are looking at his brain right now, and the pathways that are firing 14 times a second, and this is him thinking, but slow thinking. So we'll go down here to delta, which is unconscious stuff. And in the unconscious state, where the things that his brain is doing unconsciously, what you see here is the front of the brain here is kind of slow. All these pathways here are very slow. They're blue. That means they're slow. You see the back of the brain here is really pretty good, right? This is delta. This is all unconscious. And here's theta. This is when he's emotional. And you see emotionally, again, it's the frontal lobes here where he's having trouble. And this is very much related to his inability to focus and plan and execute, okay? Now here we come to his relaxation state. He cannot relax. You see his brain back here is overactive. Now, this would get him in trouble in terms of his social anxiety, right? Because this right here, so you go to a party, for example, we're using that example, and you could see here that this is the back of the brain, the parietal area that I told you is involved in social big picture factors. And you could see that the right and left side of this part of his brain are not really communicating very well. All right, so he would have trouble being relaxed, a lot of trouble being relaxed at a party. And he was actually fairly isolated because of his anxiety.
Would he have trouble communicating with other people?
The question is, would he have trouble communicating with other people? And I would say that he would. And the reason I would say that is because of this tract right here. Here is the frontal slant tract right here. It's involved in word finding. So he would probably have trouble finding words. Especially if he was emotional, because his theta, that's the emotional band. Now, that's him relaxing or trying to relax. This is him trying to think overall, but then we could break this down into fast thinking, and you see he's not doing so great in the fast thinking. And again, notice it's more the back. Let me reorient this here, but it's more the back sides of the brain here. There we go. See, some of the frontal and also in the back, he's having trouble. This is him, part of his relaxation. Again, you see difficulty towards the back side of the brain. And here's the other part of the relaxation. That's also a problem. Now, here's him thinking in his slow thinking. You see this that just came and went? This is called the arcuate fasciculus. He'd have trouble finding words when he's at a party, he's trying to think, he'd really have trouble finding his words because this is involved in word finding and language production.
So that would be one of the symptoms of social anxiety.
Yeah, you stumble on your words, you don't know what to say, you can't count. Huh?
Blank.
Yeah, you go blank. You can't count on yourself. You can't count on your brain. This is his intermediate thinking, still a problem, and here is his fastest thinking. So we see that. Now, the question is, does everyone need to get a QEEG? And I would say in the ideal world, for sure, you want to have a QEEG and you want to know what's going on. Now, years ago, the SPECT scan, Dr. Amen pioneered the SPECT scan use in the psychiatric and neuropsychiatric fields. And it was definitely an advance. But this test here, we do in the office, takes about an hour. You can do it in your home. We do it actually all over the country. We send the equipment to a person's house, and we get this data, and we can tell what's going on. Oh, it's completely painless. You just put a cap over your head. Now, just very interesting. Everyone's talking about AI, right? This is AI. So what we do with this is you put on a cap, and we collect the electricity from 19 points on the head. And then through basically AI and something called the inverse solution, we can actually tell, and this is, by the way, this is age and sex matched data. This is all developed at the National Institute of Mental Health during the decade of the brain. So this is not like some wild numbers or anything. This is very well established data. And we put that on, and we can actually tell what's going on in the brain. And this actually correlates very well with other types of imaging, like something called diffusion tensor imaging or neuroquant MRI and PET scanning, et cetera. So this is quite an amazing tool that tells us about the function of your brain. It doesn't tell us about the structure of your brain. It tells us about the function of your brain. And we can target different things. So now I'm going to show you, just to go a little further. Here, we can find specific networks in the brain. So let's see, we can look at all of these networks. So here's the anxiety network. Now, sometimes what you think is anxiety, social anxiety, is actually secondary to another problem. So if this guy here, if we go down to 14 here, you see here, this is the posterior cingulate gyrus I was telling you about. But you see here, there's something going on here. You see all these areas here. This is the anxiety network. And you see all these areas here are, this is the motor area. This is the sensory, paracentral. This is area called the precuneus, which tells you what, what's going on in your body, how you feel about yourself. You see all these areas here involved in anxiety, and you see how they're all kind of lit up in him, most of them. The question is, what is going on here? And what's going on here with this guy was actually infection and also mold. He lived in a very old house and moldy house, etc. And it was that what was causing it. Now, if we get rid of these networks, you'll see, get rid of them.
What are other sources of inflammation besides infection?
Let me get rid of that. So look at this. This is like a crown on his head, right? This is not from a head injury. This is clearly something metabolic going on in his system. This could be from a tick-borne illness. This could be from mold. It could be from oxygenation problems. This could be from hormonal problems. There are lots of sources of inflammation, but the big categories are food, mold, and infection. Chronic inflammation, say you have autoimmune disease, for example, that can also do that.
What about substance use?
Substance use will clearly cause abnormalities in the brain here. The pattern will be different, actually, it will be more widespread. And what we can do, sometimes when we do the neuroquant, we'll do after we do the QEEG, I'm sorry, we'll do a neuroquant MRI, and we can actually see which specific structures in the brain are inflamed. This here is telling us that in these red areas, the brain is either irritated or it doesn't have enough energy to stay stable. Okay, we can't tell from this whether or not it's inflammation or lack of energy to stay stable. And of course, other labs and the history and the physical will give us that information. So that is pretty much kind of the way we look at things. I would say that in general, when you have social anxiety, that there's a multi-layered approach, and that it's important to understand that part of the reason for the anxiety can actually be that your brain is actually not functioning, and it's basically, like I said, going into a boxing ring or into a situation where you don't have the normal capacities. Somebody asking you to run a race, but you have a broken leg or an ankle that's inflamed or something like that. And that's kind of what's going to cause anxiety, because you can't keep up and you can't cope. You might be having social anxiety because you're having mild cognitive impairment, so you can't really think as clearly. You have brain fog. Maybe you have brain fog from long COVID. That can cause inflammation. That's an infectious kind of thing, an autoimmune type of thing. So that's really what you want to do, is you want to get to the root causes. Now, sometimes the root causes could be trauma in childhood, right? But when you have trauma in childhood, that also sets you up for metabolic problems and adrenal gland problems, et cetera. So these things don't really travel alone. It's not usually one magic bullet. It can be sometimes, but usually there are a variety of layers involved in the causes of social anxiety. And today we looked at two broad parts of this analysis. So that's what I've got. I'm gonna take some questions now. If anybody has any questions, let's see in the chat. Let's see, aside from SPECT scan, how can we evaluate ourselves regarding specific possible effects of anxiety that we might be experiencing unconsciously? For instance, in a unique individual, what kind of functions are affected in him or her, meaning critical thinking, emotional intelligence, less awareness, thought block? I mean, I guess you're trying to ask if I got it right, and if I don't have it right, just please, raise your hand and we'll clarify the question. But you're saying um, I think you're saying what kinds of functions are affected, and it could be any of your functions. Could be your language functions. There are different tracks affecting language. Could be your thalamus. Thalamus is the grand central station of the brain, and that's a relay station, often imbalanced. There's so many possible causes. So when you lump it into social anxiety, it's just such a broad brush. Really, it's almost a waste paper basket diagnosis. It's like saying, I have pneumonia. Well, what kind of pneumonia do you have? Is it tuberculosis? Is it pneumococcal pneumonia? Is it fungal pneumonia? Is it COVID pneumonia? What kind of pneumonia? It matters. So it also matters with social anxiety. What really is behind the final symptom, which is social anxiety? And there are lots and lots of things that contribute to it and cause it. The images I showed were from a QEEG, okay? Quantitative EEG. The treatment directed here by anxiolytics is just a blanket therapy. How can one actually get proper diagnosis? So, yeah, anxiolytics are commonly used. It's not that they're always bad. Sometimes the anxiety itself is so bad that you actually need a Band-Aid. You really have to stop the bleeding. High anxiety can make a person feel suicidal. It's sometimes it's horrible. You want to jump out of your skin. So let's not say all meds are bad. Now, what you really want to do is you want to find a functional medicine doctor who will look at the metabolic causes and some of these, the digestive, the nutritional, the hormonal, the immune, infectious issues, any toxicity issues, maybe genetic issues. You want someone to do a very thorough functional medicine evaluation. And then I think you want to have a thorough evaluation with the quantitative EEG and neuroquant imaging, along with a thorough history and physical and laboratory data. And that's how we make the diagnosis. We spend usually anywhere between 3 and 5 hours with somebody to really try and get to what are the root causes. Take a thorough history, develop the timeline, look at the family history, etc. So it's a thorough process if you want to get to root causes.
Thank you, everybody. And you to turn off your microphone.
Okay, let me.
Thank you, everybody. Okay, sorry about that, folks. Thank you, everybody, for joining us, for your questions, and we look forward to seeing you on our next Eventbrite. Okay, thank you. Thank you all. Okay, bye-bye.